Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to start about the Restoration period in English literature. So in Restoration, the Restoration and the 18th, century, 1616 in 1800. So in literature, so England in 1660, England in 1660, exhausted 20, years of civil war and, Black Plague and the Great Fire of London, which left, 2.5 for citizens homeless. The, other tables of this time periods include Age of Reason, Age of Enlightenment, Augustan Age, and New Classical period, Augustan and New Classical time. So we can say that Restoration literature, is the English literature written during this the historical period and commonly referred as the English Restoration 1660 to 1689, which corresponds to the last years of their direct in England and Scotland and Ireland. So the British restoration, restoration of the English and monarchy, and began in 1660 when the English, Scottish, and Irish and monarchies were all restored under Charles II after the interim that followed the wars of the three kingdom. The term restoration is used to describe both the actual event by which the monarchy was restored and the period of several years afterwards in which a new political and settlement was established. It is very often used to cover the whole, of Charles sacking and often the brief, of this, younger brother James sacking, and context may be used to cover the whole period of the later and Stuart monarch as far as the death of Queen and the George First in 1714, for example. Restoration comedy typically encompasses works written as late in 1710, and the Church of England was restored as the national church in England, and backed by the code and the Act of Uniformity 1662. People reportedly and around Naples as a way of the uh, independence and burn copies of the league and so restoration Britain historian and Roger Baker and argues that the restoration and Charles mark a reversal of the Puritan mortality as the England's morality swung the from depression to license move or less overnight, and theaters reopen after having been closed during the protest, and Oliver Cromwell and lost its momentum, and the Restoration comedy became a recognizable genre. So, Restoration literature is the English literature written during the historical period, commonly referred to as the English Restoration, and corresponds to the last year of the director, in England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland in general. The term is used to denote roughly and homogeneous and style of literature that is centered on a celebration or reaction to the restored court of Charles II. It is a literature that includes extremes for it compasses both Paradise Lost and a love, the highest sexual comedy of the country, wife, and the moral wisdom of the Pilgrim's Progress. It show, logs and treatise and of government, the founding of the Royal Society as experiments and holy meditation of Robert and so attacks on theaters from and the pioneer of literary criticism from John Dryden and John Donne's the period and witnessed news become a and commodity the essay developed into a periodical art form and the beginning of textual criticism. So, that time, we can say that. So, England in 1660, exhausted, highly exhausted, and you can say frustrated, and, there was lot of, problems in that time, and people were, roaming here and there, and there were no shelter in that time. And, we can say that 20 years of civil war, uh, so people were, homeless, and the other labors of this time periods, include age of reason, age of enlightenment, Augustan age, neoclassical period, Augustan and neoclassical, both the ruler of Rome and the rulers of England, and restored peace and order after a leader's death and civil war. Emperor and Octavian in Rome and the family Charles II in England, both the people of Rome and the people of England were, you know, uh, suspicious of radical and revolutionaries wanted peace, order to work and enjoy life, to want future. Revolutionaries, the people, England, dug up Oliver Cromwell, who led during the civil wars and cut off his corpse, had to strike fear in any Cromwell had become a military dictator with political and values, and his corps had to strike fear in any. So Cromwell had become a military dictator, and with values writers during his time, and relate to their work after Latin works and classics and Rome, probably Greek works too, because they were deemed to have and like representative, represented universal values in human experience. So Oliver Cromwell, 1599, and helped over, through execute Charles First, established Commonwealth and Lord Protector. Charles II, son of executed Charles First, returned from France in 1660. No legitimate heads that time. So in the Renaissance, people had superstitious belief and unnatural events. They believed that the natural gave a warning about social disaster. We people, looked for the supernatural intervention in trying to explain why certain events transpired, and during the Enlightenment, the focus shifted from why did this happen and to how it become acceptable and popular to question to old explanations, even popular scientific observation and the birth of modern English prose. The members of the Royal Society of London call for more precise, plain, and exact writing, such as So long sentences, there was a new form of English prose, popularity of journals, pamphlets and travel writing. For what reasons this means more than one is John Dryden is important because he is considered, founder and first true master of modern English prose. In poetry, he popularized, regularized meter, made diction precise. So, religious belief based upon reason and the observation of nature, watchmaker analogy says God built complex universe, then let it run by itself. Christianity in its various forms still held over almost all Europeans during this time period. And religion and politics, Charles II and reinstituted the church as official Church of England. He attempted to outlaw Puritan and independent sects. This resulted in the popularity of British colonies in America also is made the republic scared voice and subject and so bloodless revolution. So when Charles II died, he had no legal legitimate heir. The problem was his brother James II was a Roman Catholic, unpopular. James II eventually to France in 1688. His Protestant daughter Mary took over. Since then, all English monarchs have been James II, William and Mary, George First, Anne, and George II, George IV, William IV, and George III. So we can say that the comedy of manners is a theatrical genre that was, uh, popular during the Restoration period. Satire, social life, politics, faith, and the restoration of monarchy. So the age of satire, also we can say that the most accomplished writers of the 18th century were Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift, and they both criticized contemporary society. They believed in order and discipline. Pope attacked immorality and Baptist, usually of the upper class. Pope and Swift were both and by the and in art, manners, morals that underlay the polished surfaces of Augustan life. It's violent and really underside. Both writers deplored corrupt politics and materialism and commercialism. So, for fools rush in where and just fear to tread. Alexander Pope, I never wondered to see man. I beg to but I often wonder Jonathan Swift and Daniel Defoe stood for middle class values and prudence, industry, respectability, and journalism, and the and 18th century were reporters and reformers of public manners and morals. So public poetry, poets of this time had no desire to write about the soul, feelings, believed poetry was a public function. An Augustan poet would craft a poem by deciding in advance the king kind of poem they wanted with its exact meter and rhyme. Augustan Alice celebrated to the dead by recalling the best about a person, even if it was not true. Poetic satire says the worst thing about someone or something to expose them into odd expression and of people public emotion often celebratory poetry of this time period was highly crafted according to proper format. So we can say that restoration, in restoration we have seen a lot of things. The comedy of manners is a theatrical genre that was very popular during the restoration period. These comedies were, and that with lots of hilarious and like focusing on love, and their plots lines revolves around unfaithful and tricky lovers, and these comedies made fun of people and sometimes entire. Sometimes entire. And so we can say that comedies made fun of people and sometimes entire social classes. Everyone is made to look ridiculous in these plays. People are stupid and elsewhere they are cruel and exploitative, but it was all done in the name of fun. Audiences want to these plays during the restoration period to laugh their heads off, and so tricky and we call and are big themes in comedies of manner. They are also big themes in William Wycherley's comedies, The Country Wife, and William Congreve's Love for Love is a comedy, and that revolves around love and money. So the restoration writers could not get enough satire. What is the deal with satire? Satire is when we joke or exaggerate in order to point out someone else's flaws. Think John Oliver's last week, and think the onion. Think generally, and the restoration writers develop satire as a genre. To literary rivals, religious figures, even entire social classes, and showing just how ridiculous they all were. Restoration writers mastered the art of poking fun at people, and John Dryden's Mac Flatnoy is a classical satire. It also helped popularize mock heroic poetry, and Samuel Butler pokes fun at Puritans in his satire poems, and a heroic couplet is two lines of words, and which rhyme. It does not, however, and the popular belief and rescue puppies from burning buildings, help old ladies across streets, or and history time. The heroic couplet in English literature was pioneered by George Chaucer in the Middle Age, but it was not until the Restoration came alone that the use of his structure in English poetry became widespread, and that was thanks to one man, John Dryden. Dryden was so good at coming up with heroic couplets. He, single-handedly helped make them an essential part of English poetry. He is the hero of the heroic couplet, and John Dryden is a master of heroic couplet. Check out his use of these couplets in his poem to his cat March Majesty. There are a lot of things. The restoration writers were not interested in the silly things, and philosophical questions like boring. They were interested in drama, all the drama, and so Daniel Defoe stood for middle class, values, and also industry respectability. Journalist of the 18th century was were re- the reporters and reformers of public manners and morals and public poetry. Poets of this time had no desire to write about the soul, feelings, belief, and poetry was a public function, and functions, and poets of this time had no desire to write about the soul, feelings, we love. Poetry was a public function, and Augustan poet would craft a poem by deciding in advance the kind of poem they wanted with its exact meter and rhyme. And Augustan Alizi celebrated the dead by recalling the best about a person, even if it was not true. Poetry satire says the worst thing about someone or something to expose him it to or expression of public emotion. Often celebratory poetry of this time period was highly so according to proper format. So to the restoration writers were not. So the restoration writers were not, interested in the silly things like nature and philosophical questions, and they were interested in all the drama that went on in the society in which they lived. Social behavior and social manners then are big themes in restoration literature. The writing of this period were, obsessed with social life, who people fall in love with, who they want to marry, who they sleep with, who they betray, and how much money they have or not. And it is a literature that focus on the like takes place in drawing rooms, in saloons, and and the restoration literature comes from a political event, and we can say that. So, the restoration, politics, literature comes from a political event, and the restoration of monarchy in Britain in 1660. So, it is a huge surprise that politics and the political themes are making a kind of big deal in this literary movement. Restoration literature raises big or political questions like what type of government is best for society. What role does government or monarchy plays in people's lives? What kind of do we owe to our government? How does politics shape culture? The Restoration period was a time when Britain and was seriously and time was a time when Britain was seriously rethinking its political identity, and we will find that the Restoration writers were also thinking and pretty hard also about politics in their writing. And John Locke, was a super duper important political track of the Restoration period, and it influenced the American Revolution. And John Dryden was a far fan of monarchy as a governmental institution, And the restoration period has given us some of the most important religious literature in the English language. So John Milton's Paradise Lost, which tells the epic tale of the vanishment of man from the Garden of Eden, was published during this period. And he played a vast play. So we can say, so which tells, so English language, Milton's Paradise Lost, which tells about the paradise lost, and which tells the epic tale. So in restoration and the 18th century, so a lot of changes we can see that time. See, we have discussed here war and plague and the difficulties and problems, and situation was against, and time was not good, and people were roaming here and there, and they were finding their shelter, and they were just like they were very poor at the time. So England, in England, so we can say the theatrical genre that was over and popular during the restoration period. These comedies also we have seen here, like Dirty, with lots of hilarious and like dialogue focusing on like that dialogues, and their plot lines revolved around unfaithful, and these comedies made fun of people and sometimes entire social and classes. Everyone is made to look ridiculous, and these places where people are stupid, and or else they are and exploitative, but it was all done in the name of fun. And audiences went to these plays during the restoration period to laugh and their heads off, and the restoration writers could 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 point out someone else's flaws. Think John Oliver's last week and tonight. So at the time of England, exhausted. They were very exhausted, and years of civil war, and plague, and the great fire in London, and when which left to the half, and citizens, and and homeless. The other labels of this time period include Age of Reason, and Age of Enlightenment, Augustan Age, New Classical period, and Augustan and New Classical, and both the ruler of Rome and the rulers of England restored peace and order after a leader's death and civil war. Emperor Octavian in Rome and the family. So Charles II in England, both the people of Rome and the people of England were, wary of war, suspicious of, revolutionaries who wanted peace, order to work and enjoy, to warn future revolutionaries. The people of England dug up Oliver Cromwell, cut off his corpse, had to strike fear in Annie, and dissenters. Cromwell had become a military dictator with a political, and writers during this time modulated and their works after Latin works classics of Rome, probably Greek works too, because they were deemed to have and represented universal values in human experience. And Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, held overthrow, execute, established Commonwealth, and Lord Protector Charles II, son of executed Charles I, returned from France in 1660, no legitimate heir. And in the Renaissance, people had superstitions. They had highly superstitious people, and having they were very superstitious, and they are not. They always believe in God, and lot of changes we can see. So there were lot of difficulties, problems we have seen in that time, in that era. So during the Enlightenment, the focus shifted from why did this happen to how it become acceptable and popular to question to old explanations. So, the birth of modern English prose, So in the Renaissance, people had superstitious belief, unnatural events. So they believe that nature gave warnings or social disaster. People looked for supernatural intervention in trying to explain why certain events, transfer. And during the Enlightenment, the focus shifted from why did this happen to how it became accepted and popular to question to whole explanation. So, and even popular scientific observation, the birth of modern English prose, the members of the Royal Society of London, for more precise and plain and exact writing, such as, like long sentences. And there was a new form of English prose popularity, journals, pamphlets, and travel writing. So, for what reason this means to more than one is John Dryden is important because he is considered founder and first true master of modern English prose, and first true master and of modern English prose poetry, and popularized, regularized meter, diction, design. So we have seen lot of things during that time. So a lot of changes in society, and and modern English prose, and so we have seen a lot of things here. The members of the Royal Society, London, and precise, plain, and exact writing, such as short, middle, and long sentences. There was a new form of English prose and popularity of journals and pamphlets and travel writing. For what reasons? And John Dryden is important because he is considered founder and first true master of modern English prose. In poetry, he regularized meter, made diction precise. So so we can say that religious belief and based upon the reason and observation of nature and watchmaker and analogy and sees God built, complex, universe, then let it run by itself. So, itself, Christianity in its, we can say that Christianity in its various, forms and, like scenes and Charles II and, Christianity and still held power over almost all Europeans during this time period and religion and politics. Charles II, reinstituted the like church as official church of England. He had attempted to outlaw Puritan and Independence Acts. This resulted in the popularity of British colonies in America. Also, it made the public scared to voice opposing views on any subject. The bloodless revolution. When Charles II died, he had no legal, and the problem was his brother James II was Roman Catholic. Unpopular James II eventually fled out to France, and in 1658, his Protestant daughter Mary, took over. And since then, all English monarchs have been so in that era, restoration, it is century, like James II, Annie, and George First, William Mary, who seen many things in his life. So George II, George the Third, William Fourth, and when Charles II came to power, one of his first acts, was to reopen the theatre. Cromwell had closed. Charles and brother James, supported play companies, and financially, this era saw the, you know, real female actresses plays were produced during this time. Period, witty comedies, and included emphasizes on sexual relationship. These plays were another outlet for satire of the age. So the most accomplished writers of the 18th century were, Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift. They both criticized contemporary society. They believed in order and discipline. Pope attacked immorality and bad taste, usually of the upper class, and Pope and Swift were both, like by the, and we can say that underlay the polished and surfaces of Augustan life. It's violent and underside. Both writers deplored and corrupt politics, materialism, and commercialism. So they had in their life, they wrote many things in the history of English literature. Jonathan Swift. So I never wanted to see, man, but I often wonder to see them not ashamed. Jonathan Swift. So for full rush in where and just fear to Brad Alexander, Alexander Pope. So, Daniel Defoe and stood for middle class values, so prudence, industry, respectability, journalism, of the 18th century were re, re you know, re reporters and reformers of public manners and morals and public poetry, poets of this time had no desire to write about the soul feelings. Believed poetry was a public function, and Augustan poet would craft a poem by deciding in advance the kind of poem they wanted with its exact meter and rhyme. Augustan Alize celebrated the dead by recalling the best. So, about a person, even if it, expose them it to like old, expressions, and we can say that public emotion and poetic satire says the worst thing about someone or something to explore, expose them it to and expression of public emotion often celebratory poetry of this time period was highly crafted according to proper format. So, early novels were long, fictional, broad stories, and like these novels had a lasting importance. Fiction is a reflection of the time so in which is was written. These novels help us to understand humor and sight of human experiences as they help to expand literacy and had a public audience written in a simpler more common form of English to be read and understood. The commanding figure of Johnson, Samuel Johnson, criticized optimism, the idea of progress, that human society was always improving for the better, and the idea that human are fundamentally and more moral reform society everyone would just to do the right thing, so searching for a simpler life. So by the end of the 18th century, so the world was changing, industrial revolution, change, manufacturing, cities were booming, pollution, the French revolutions, new writers discussed trade by pollution and mass expansion. They turned to writing about nature and the effects of mass industrialization on the soul. So, these are very, important points related to restoration period and restoration era we have discussed in this class. Now we are just concluding all these points, at the end, we are just concluding, these points. So we have seen, period of, restoration era, problems, sufferings, and, and poverty, and people were homeless, they had no shelter, and they were roaming here and there, and without without having any any object, any any vision of their life. So they were very frustrated, and and they were having they had a civil war at that time, and black plague, we can say that. So they were frustrated highly. So we can say that the time of age of reason, age of enlightenment, Augustan age, and neoclassical period also we can say. So Augustan and neoclassical, both the ruler of Rome and the ruler of England restored peace and order after a leader's death and civil war. Both the people of Rome and the people of England were very of war and suspicious of and revolutionaries wanted peace, order, and to warn future revolutionaries. The people of England dug up and Oliver Cromwell, who led during the civil wars and cut off his corpse, had to strike, fearing any dissents, had become a military dictator. And writers during this time, they were, probably Greeks works too, because they were deemed to have permanence and represented universal values. So thank you so much. In next class we will discuss some literary terms and figure of speech and the drama, prose and poetry. So thank you.